And that was where my first run of Dark Souls ended. After 15 hours of frustration, 15 hours of stubbornness, and 15 hours of contemplating how my friend could possibly recommend this, my first trip to Lordran eventually ended in defeat. It felt like a total waste of time, so on June 14th, 2015, I uninstalled the game and soon forgot about it. Until May of 2016 anyway. Now shortly before my return to Lordran, my friend and I got onto the topic of game design, and on this particular occasion, we landed specifically on Dark Souls. Boy, did I have a lot to say. I recounted my difficult journey about how after leaving the asylum, there was this insane difficulty spike that I believed was in the first area, the catacombs. I just want to say, I died over and over and over and over and over again. Skeleton after skeleton after exploding head after skeleton after exploding head after exploding head after skeleton. I figured out that I could just bait these damn things off of ledges. That way they wouldn't be able to return back to light if I wanted any actual shot in making any real progress, let alone trying to kill those fucking necromancers, so that way I wouldn't have to deal with the skeletons coming back to life every time. So, to continue, I run into this skeletal Cthulhu dwarf blacksmith.
Be gone with you.
And it feels like at this point, okay, cool, I'm making actual progress. I walk about 5 feet out of his cave, and then I get mowed down by some of these BDSM skeletons, and they touch death me. So I finally just uninstall the game. Yeah, it's been over half a decade, 6 or 7 years by this point, and I still begin to sweat when I walk into any sort of new area and I pop up, it says like the catacombs or anything like that. I still remember all of this vividly in my head, this first experience. It was just so... Oh, a bell above, a bell below, says the crestfallen. I didn't even get to glimpse these stupid things. Like, I didn't even clear the first hurdle. And my buddy, he's got the gall. He has the chutzpah to say to me. He says, "Oh, so you've hollowed then." I still remember the smarm in his voice when he says this, and this is a term that I've heard before in game. I didn't really think about it too much at the time, but this is something that the crestfallen knight in Firelink actually mentions.
Ah, your face. You're practically hollow. But who knows? Going hollow could solve quite a bit.
Hollowing in Dark Souls refers to a degenerative state that eventually leads to complete madness. The land of Lordran is filled with many hollows. many of whom have been lost at madness long before you even set foot into the asylum. Along with a select few, only dregs remain. However, one commonality that has been pointed out within the community time and time again is that allies and foes alike only seem to truly go hollow once they've given up. And with all of this newfound information, that's when I begun to realize how wrong I had truly been. With this newfound resolve, I'd revisit Dark Souls once again. And it absolutely had nothing to do with the clip of some dude killing some bosses with fucking bananas that I was shown soon after. I definitely did not get my second win and decided to reinstall the game because of that. Or you know what, maybe it's still a little bit too early for the bananas. Maybe it was the bongo drum. It was not the bongo drums. It had nothing to do with the bongos or the bananas. I picked the game back up just because I'm good. I'm really good at gaming. Lordran is an exhausted land, one where gods and monsters alike limp along. A land where a rot so foul has steeped in, it can be felt in every aspect of life, or what remains of it. It's a world where the system is so deeply ingrained in death and devourment. Everyone clings to what little life remains in themselves and in others. You yourself are no exception. You don't have superpowers. You aren't special. It's as easy to kill you as it is to be killed by any other nobody, let alone somebody of significant name value. You start in the same place that so many, uncountable undead have started in before you. The only difference is that you have the ability to claw yourself along just a little further. You can choose to get up just one more time. Dark Souls is that, death and rebirth. It's about not giving up against insurmountable odds. You're told time and time again, something along the lines of going hollow could solve quite a bit, because the task ahead of you is so arduous. The gameplay and sentiment match. We all have those gaming moments where we're required to beat a boss in gameplay, only to be defeated by them in the following cutscene. Dark Souls never has a disconnect between how you're supposed to feel and how you actually feel. And that's because the land of Lordran is unforgiving to all of its inhabitants. Not for the sake of it, but because the world itself is dying. So why wouldn't you be too? In this way, lore is reflected in gameplay. My original issue with the game is what brought me to quit that first time. But the game's not unfair. Every fight you learn, every trap makes you cautious, every path has an alternate. Even though I started off hating it, ultimately I fall in love with what makes Dark Souls, well, Dark Souls. Oh, and there's also the combat. It's basically a fighting game. Dark Souls is not an action-adventure game, nor is it a hack and slash. While fighting bosses and regular enemies is a little bit different from PvP, it holds a lot of the same principles that traditional fighting games have. To get to the real meat and potatoes, let's talk about what I think are, in general, the 4 phases of fighting gameplay. It all starts with the neutral game. A phase of gameplay where 2 players poke, prod, and wait for the other to make a significant enough mistake, or attempt to enter their preferred distance, such as a grappler wishing to be close up, or a zoner trying to create space. The punish game, where either yourself or your opponent makes a significant enough mistake that the other can capitalize on it. Whipping a hit is one such scenario that can lead to a disadvantageous state. Usually by combo, special move. While it might not be a traditional system, Dark Souls has light attacks that can be chained together, just like any other combo. Even though I said there are 4 stages, I believe that the last 2 are like different sides of the same coin. I like to call them the recovery and pressure phases. Most modern fighting games have systems in place to not only discourage attempting infinite combos, but also to make them impossible. If such limitations were not in place, one mistake could lead to the end of a game with no room for counterplay. For example, some of these systems that discourage infinites can be seen in games like Dragon Ball FighterZ, where taper and damage makes hits become negligible the longer the combo chain. This makes it so that if infinites are in fact possible, they require near perfect execution, because again, the longer the combo, the less the damage per hit. Marvel vs. Capcom 3 has a mechanic known as hit stun deterioration. For every hit that you land on an opponent, the amount of frames that keep them in place and prevent them from reacting are reduced as your combo count increases. So the longer a chain continues for, the shorter the duration of time the stun is active compared to a fresh hit with the same type stunning them for longer. Dark Souls solves this issue through a pretty interesting means. It's through the use of its stamina system. Since every action besides standing or walking drains or slows the regeneration of stamina, this effectively puts a limit to the length of chain combos. Now that I've talked about why the punishment phase ends, the moment a combo has been completed or dropped, the player in the advantageous state will enter the pressure phase with the goal of returning to the previous phase of play to pile on more damage. On the other side of things, the player in the disadvantageous state enters the recovery phase, attempting to return to either neutral, or, if they manage to get lucky with some sort of reversal, enter their own punishment phase to regain lost ground. By not understanding this core aspect of Dark Souls gameplay, I was misinterpreting how the game should be played. Hack and slashes reward high or even infinite combos. They're not 1v1 fights that can't be interrupted. You're allowed to press your advantage while your opponent's knocked down. Who cares if a few dozen fodder soldiers are brought from 100 to 0 in the meantime? Playing against a real person is the opposite. You need to have systems that limit pressure, otherwise that combat becomes totally lopsided. Now, by not understanding what I was playing, I was hindering my enjoyment of the game in the first place, since even a low to mid-tier understanding of fighting games can help with your own casual enjoyment. You don't need to know everything about frame data, it's safe on block, distancing, positioning, startup frames, recovery frames. None of that really matters, although it all applies to Dark Souls 2. You really don't have to know the numbers, but just knowing that Majin Buu's 5M is the slowest startup in the game really doesn't help you if you don't know how to react to it safely and just start pressing buttons. If you do that, you get punished. So while you don't need to learn the numbers, Dark Souls is very good about teaching you what's safe or easily punishable with big telegraph moves. A part of the learning process is going up against new enemies with different attack patterns, kind of similar to different characters in a fighting game. This is where I believe Dark Souls excels in its teaching process. In the story mode of any fighting game, developers can't get away with placing the same character for multiple fights in a row as a way for you to learn their attack patterns. But a game like Dark Souls is able to place the same enemy in a level dozens of times over, and that helps reinforce those patterns. For my fellow brainlets out there, if you can't get a hit with your great sword, either try a new weapon or switch up your timing. Now, please take this with a grain of salt, because I'm no fighting game expert. I do have an understanding of the basics, but that's really it. The best I can do is string together an auto combo in Dragon Ball FighterZ if I'm lucky. If you want to hear from people who actually know what they're talking about, this video's description has several links below, including videos or resources that I used to help with research for this. And with that, we're done. Boy, I feel like I'm forgetting something. That first area that I ended up in felt pretty high leveled. I wonder if it's because I went the wrong way. what exactly is it that makes a Metroidvania, Metroidvania? First off, let's discuss not Troidvanias, or, just like more linear games. Imagine a maze. Kind of like this one. It may have many paths, but it really only has one entrance and one exit. There'd be side paths, which house optional power-ups, secrets, maybe a few mandatory bosses for progression. So I guess it's not really a side path, but it's relatively linear, minus a few necessary detours, I should say. To give it a couple examples, let's start with simple-ish and least complex, and then we'll move on to maybe pretty darn linear, a little complexity. Anyway, some easy examples to spot this stuff in. I mean, let's be real, dude can kind of only really go to the right. But don't get me wrong, it can certainly be fucking hard. Like, I won't be sub 4 minutes 55 seconds anytime. Honestly, probably won't be going below an hour anytime soon either, but go right, save the princess, it's all pretty easy to understand to the grand scheme of things. Besides not being a 2D side-scroller, Halo tends to have slightly more open areas that lead you along with waypoints. These open areas are more like jungle gyms that allow you to tackle enemies in multiple different ways. However, pretty much every area ends in a singular, proverbial tunnel of some sort that leads you to the next area. I can see it getting a little murky here because COD's a pretty cinematic experience. You generally are zigzagging between one location to the next, building to building. It doesn't really feel linear because so many missions that you do have you sometimes double back, or you get knocked from a singular location to the next. But again, there really isn't exploration in that same sense. As you get better at the game, you can't take alternate paths or acquire new skills that allow you to get to areas early. You simply get pulled along by your AI companions most of the time, and they just kind of tell you to do things. Most of the time, Gears is a very linear design. A few levels shake things up, but the majority is just point A to point B. There are a few times where you're given branching paths, but it really doesn't do much more than add to the replay value of the game, since the split always converges soon after. A maze may become more complex with more branching paths, but if many of those paths lead to the same location, it only adds to a surface level complexity. Games like Fallout may seem the most likely to fit here. They're more open, exploration-based, and you get to tackle most things in any order, but the core is just so much different. You can't unlock new areas by using the correct ability, or just by being skilled enough. Areas don't interconnect with each other, or circle back and create shortcuts. You can just sort of walk there, in a straight line, minus the occasional mountain or town. I realized that these more linear games had conditioned me, and I know linear may not exactly be the best word for all of them. A better word could be objective-based for some of these games, but anyway, they just didn't teach me what I needed to know. I didn't know that exploration could be such a big part of the fun. Red Dead has random encounters in its world. Secrets. Mini-games, and other optional things that you can do. Things that make you want to explore for the fun of it. But it's just different. They flesh out the world, and sure, you can effectively stumble upon these things, but you don't accidentally stumble upon them like you would in a Metroidvania. If the goal's your destination, then stumbling upon optional content happens in tandem with that goal. You're always looking to further it. The path may be unclear, and who knows how far you actually have to go, or where even. If you're lucky, You make it a vague objective marker in some games that give you an idea, but who really knows exactly how far it is, or if you can even go in the same direction it's pointed at. You might have to go around, or up, or down, or below it, or who knows. Optional content's a way to rest alongside of an unknown journey. In Red Dead, you always know exactly where you need to go, and exactly how to get there. It's nothing more than a distraction. Let's take this to a sort of extreme for a moment here. One of the biggest criticisms that I often see for Fallout 4 is how after your child's been kidnapped, there really isn't, I'm not exactly sure how to, incentive. There's really no incentive to go save the kid. Your character in every interaction is just frantic about finding them, but you're on the opposite side of the map doing something, anything. Is it wrong to play poker in a video game? No, but in a setting where traveling is just that, traveling, it becomes a means to get from one fight to the next, or one puzzle or whatever to the next one. In and of itself, it's not a problem that needs a solution. So the question becomes, why aren't you already there? Why are you going off and doing other things? You need to save your child, or you need to save the world, or whatever it is. So just walk forward until you get to your destination. In the original Metroid, an era where you had the Ninja Gaidens and Marios and Contras and Mega Mans, the goal is go right. That's it. Now that is the same thing for Metroid. The original first Metroid, it is exactly the same thing. The problem is, however, if you go right, you get stuck. You cannot proceed. Even in the first game, of the series, it shows you that you have to go off the beaten path. You can't rush straight to your destination. It's not that the game won't let you.
How about we explore the area ahead of us later?
You just simply can't. You're not good enough. You're not well equipped enough. You don't have the ability, and you don't know how to. You don't know how to get around the Taurus Demon. You do not know how to skip Blighttown. Can you even save Lair? Before any of this, I was just so focused on getting to that destination that I forgot about the journey. It should be kind of obvious at this point, but Metroidvanias do share a lot of similarities to this maze-like structure that I was talking about. You can have multiple routes and keys and paths that circle back on one another, then bring you to earlier areas that eventually open up new paths. So much of these worlds are interconnected with multiple entrances and exits to new areas. Maybe it isn't the strongest example out there, but Metroid Fusion has hidden routes from one area to the next. It's just extremely apparent that the first Dark Souls, it just takes so much from the Metroidvania playbook. I can't tell you the amount of times that I said, oh shit, I'm back here? That relief that you get stumbling back into Firelink, or an old bonfire that you previously kindled, or even just finding an area that you've been to previously, just getting a shortcut, and knowing that you can get from point A to point C instead of having to go through point B, it's a whole different type of euphoria that you feel. So, in all reality, I know I said that Metroidvanias, they look like this, but it really fucking looks like this! Now, for real this time, this brings us to the end, with a brand new perspective and a lot more jolly cooperation than I'd like to admit for my first time. I decided to try out Dark Souls again. Now I have a fucking problem.